Hey, welcome back. I am once again assembling the Shining Force for one of its more obscure quests, Shining Force CD, which I am actually playing on a Genesis Mini 2. I have never owned an original Sega CD, and honestly, with the Genesis Mini 2, it's nice to not have to worry about limited internal storage, and it's nice to be able to create save states. Shining Force CD is a game not many people have probably ever tried, and until recently, that included me. That's partially because it was released on the oft-forgotten Sega CD in 1994 and 1995. Shining Force CD is actually a unique game, though, in that it is a remake of the two Game Gear Shining Force games, Shining Force Gaiden 1 and 2, though they have cooler subtitles in the West, Toward the Root of Evil and Sword of Hajia. Interestingly, only Gaiden 2, Sword of Hajia, ever saw a North American release, so Shining Force CD was actually the first time Western players had access to Shining Force Gaiden 1. Plus, there are two extra books, books 3 and 4, with smaller challenge quests that must be unlocked. Today, I'm going to focus exclusively on Shining Force CD Book 1, Toward the Root of Evil. And I'm going to cover part 2 and maybe touch books 3 and 4 just a bit in the next video. Well, let's see if Shining Force CD belongs on your list of games to play or not. Shining Force, assemble! The story takes place about 20 years after Shining Force 1, and Queen Anri is on the throne. This is actually a cool start, and I really like the nods to the original Shining Force game, its characters, and how some of your characters in this game are their offspring. And there's even a full animated video that features voiceovers that kind of tells you the story of what happens between Shining Force 1 and Shining Force Gaiden 1. And heck, Lo is even your advisor in this game. Sadly, that's kind of where my praise for this game's plot ends. Yeah, Cyprus is taken over and invades Guardiana. An enemy named Waldal is trying to revive in some kind of demon force. And yeah, there's a couple minor twists and turns, but the game features a more basic plot than even Shining Force 1, which had a pretty basic plot. In other words, there's not really any memorable characters in terms of the story, and the dialogue is very simple and mostly uninteresting. I feel like this might be a result of the original Game Gear limitations, and if I had to guess, that the gaming philosophy really wanted to focus on gameplay over exposition for a handheld that was known to suck down batteries faster than I can say Hajia correctly. A final note on the story though. The second book does directly continue from this game, so we can actually see the very nascent ambition that would be the multi-game narratives that were Shining Force 3 and Golden Sun taking their roots here in Shining Force CD. One theme in this video is that all roads are going to lead to one big change compared to the first two Shining Force games on Genesis. And that continues here with the fact that the story probably suffers due to the fact that there's no exploration in the game. Instead, players battle, and there's a small camp that is your base and sometimes a shop between battles. And you can't even explore this tiny area, but instead you just click right to access the shop, or left to access the facilities, which are menu driven. You can do stuff in there like change your items, give items, equip items, save the game, promote characters, and revive them, and so on. Other than that, you just simply exit that area and march on to the next battle. Some people say they really like this, that the exploration was superfluous in the first two games, while others say this is one of Shining Force CD's biggest flaws. Now, I have to say, I agree with the people in the latter camp, unfortunately. See, the exploration in Shining Force 1 and 2 made me feel more attached to the world, the lore, and the characters. I got to interact with townsfolk and new characters, and there were even a lot of secrets to find, including secret characters, places, and promotional items. Without the exploration, and especially with the lack of any real plot to work from, the battles, while mostly fun, do end up getting really redundant. Now, I do get that this was a Game Gear game, and probably came a lot working with the early handheld limitations, but since they remade the game, adding some form of exploration, even if less grandiose than the first two games on the Genesis, would have been really welcome. One idea I had was that maybe your HQ could have been a small area or small town you could have explored where you mingle with your characters, and enjoy a couple small side offerings. Onto the combat though, which is where you will spend 95% of your time in Shining Force CD. The combat is thankfully quick, like Shining Force 2. The cursor moves quickly, and everything feels very snappy and responsive. The animations also look really good, and the meat of the Shining Force battle formula is still intact. In my Shining Force 2 review, I mentioned that the game had a certain cadence that a lot of other tactical RPGs or strategy RPGs just didn't have, and Shining Force CD does mostly have that cadence on hand. However, there are some issues. First, at least on normal difficulty, which I played on, the enemies revert to the bad AI from Shining Force 1. On many occasions, enemies had the opportunity to easily wipe out a party member, or at least reduce the HP of a vulnerable party member, but instead attack another random character who they probably deal 1 damage to. And this foolish AI always seems to send in easily manageable waves of foes rather than swarming you or doing anything remotely tactical. I had to use almost zero strategy in the first half of the game. Now I will say that the second half of the game did see a difficulty ramp a little bit, which was welcome, but only the last battle in the game really actually challenged me in any meaningful way. My other gripe is that certain characters are just too buffed. Any physical attacks done by normal enemies to my main character and a couple of the other stronger characters such as Roos or Apis only did 1 damage most of the time. This made these characters impervious to death, minus hits from the boss or some mages, which were honestly pretty easy to pick off before they could cause me any serious headaches. On a more positive note though, I would be remiss to not point out that the introduction of some theme battles starts here, which Camelot would expand upon greatly with Shining Force 3. There are some battles where you need to pick up new weapons, fight mushrooms that can explode, and so on. Most battles were standard, but I enjoyed seeing Camelot's first effort at tinkering with the combat in ways that made battles feel unique and unique to their environments. The last thing I'll mention with the combat is that promotions have been dumbed down, with every character only promoted into a specific class at level 10 or beyond, and yes, there are some secret characters as well, but they are just found on random tiles of the map, like you need to walk on a specific tile and you recruit that character. There's not really any indicators of where they are, or there's no hints on how to find them. I managed to find one of them named Domingo by complete accident, but there are some others I saw online. None of this bothered me particularly since there were plenty of characters to choose from and their promoted classes were fine, but it is a noticeable step down from Shining Force 2. All in all, the combat is a mixed bag. The charm is there, but this game came out in 1994, months after Shining Force 2, so it is fair to kind of note that while these are Game Gear games that it technically came out before Shining Force 2, the release date of Shining Force CD does feel like a step forward and a step back compared to the second Shining Force game. I do want to talk to the aesthetics though, because that might be where the biggest changes happen compared to the original Game Gear versions. I like the graphics in this game, they look way better than their Game Gear originals. It is true that the detailed animations are a bit worse than Shining Force 2, but this honestly does not bother me. I still really like the different weapons and spells and different levels of spells and different animations, and I never felt bored by watching the animations. More importantly though, the soundtracks were completely redone with a symphonic soundtrack. The music is very good here, but being an early CD-based game, the track resets every time there is a change of track. This is magnified by the fact that 90% of the game takes place in battles, where the track constantly resets after each and every attack. So while the music is good, brace yourself to listen to the first 10 seconds of a handful of battle themes over and over and over again. And finally, a quick note, the art style is as good as ever. I love the character portraits. There's something really charming about the art style and everything that Camelot does to infuse these games with their fantasy charm. So what is my overall verdict on Shining Force CD Book 1? Unfortunately, while still a decent game with more bad than good, this is probably the worst and least essential of the 90s Shining Force games. While there is a lot of fun to be had, every problem really does track back to the lack of exploration, and just how bare bones this game feels without any real story or exploration. It lacks a lot of the soul that makes the other Shining Force games what they are. and completely forces itself to stand on the merit of the combat system, which luckily remains fun, but isn't without its own issues. If I had to recommend you anything, I would say this game is a pass to all fans except dedicated Shining Force fans. Trust me, this bums me out to say it. I really do not want to sit here and tell you not to play this game. I want to tell you this is an absolute hidden gem and a reason to own a Sega CD or a Genesis Mini 2. But Shining Force CD Book 1 is serviceable, and that doesn't quite pass muster in a series that is this good. That said though, a quick note on that. A loose disc of the original Shining Force CD runs for more money than the Genesis Mini 2 does, so if you do want a legal way to play the game, a Genesis Mini 2 is a great way to experience it, and there's tons of other games on there as well. To end things on a bright note though, this is only Book 1 of the compilation of games that is Shining Force CD, and Book 2 does improve upon the formula a bit. Book 1 will probably take players 10 to 15 hours to complete, so when considering whether or not Shining Force CD is worthy of your collection, it is important to remember that this is a big game, with 2 complete Shining Force games and 2 bonus books with a handful of battles each. If I had to rate this game just Book 1 on a numerical scale, I would give it a 6.5 out of 10. Well, that is it for this video. Have you tried the game? Do you think I'm being too harsh, or do you feel like the game retained its strengths by cutting out the exploration? Let me know in the comments below, like and subscribe, and game on.